I'm sorry, say that again?
Sorry, my mic came off. I threw up a little bit. Hold on. Shoot. Man, I'm sorry about this. I hope this doesn't ruin your day.
Just flying the plane around, you seem comfortable with that?
Oh, hell yeah, it's a blast, man. I played video games before, so I know what I'm doing a little bit.
Okay, and you can see all the terrain around you. You've got no issue with visibility or anything?
Nah, everything's peachy clean. Just did a little circle around Rainier. It's beautiful. I think I got some gas to go check out the Olympics. And, yeah.
Okay, and Rich, do you know, are you able to tell what altitude you're at?
See the jets?
No, I'm not taking you to any jets. I'm actually keeping you away from aircraft that are trying to land at SeaTac.
Hey, all right, so before we start here, I want to acknowledge that thing that happened with the stolen Horizon Dash 8 and the one that was stolen and then crashed near Seattle. Okay, I don't want to make a big public service announcement out of this or anything, but I don't know, working in this industry can sometimes be challenging, with safety and schedules and weird hours, things like that. It can take its toll, but maybe we can use this as a reminder that, if things are getting tough on you or a coworker or a family member, please get some help. I mean, I know it can be hard to ask, but you don't have to tell anyone. It's confidential. And this whole situation's still playing out, and I'm getting the news just like you guys are. But, it goes without saying that this could have been so much worse than it was. So much worse. So I want to acknowledge real quickly the controller that was in the hot seat that day. Now, when we plug in, we never really know what that session's going to hold. But no one ever expects that something like that is going to happen. And worse yet, that it's going to happen to them that day and be their problem. Now, I don't know the controller or anything, but I think it goes without saying that he did an amazing job. And to be in his shoes, watching this, being the only one that can really talk to the individual, who apparently his name is Rich, yet knowing there isn't really anything you can do with a situation you know very little about, but still staying in there and doing your best until the bitter end, I don't know if most people would have kept it together so well. So, whoever you are, well, I know you're going to have a lot of interviews about what happened. You're going to hear the whole thing played over and over and over again on national news and have everything that was said and done scrutinized for the foreseeable future. I think you did an amazing job. And something tells me that old Archie, well, he would have been proud too. This is Podcasting on a Plane, episode number 27. I feel like it's been a minute, and maybe it's because I've been traveling so much, I don't know, but what a few weeks this has been. Welcome. This is Podcasting on a Plane. Thank you for being here. And on this show, we give you aviation from as many angles as possible, and today is no different. The song you're hearing, it's called Soul, and we'll get to that. Recently, very recently actually, I reconnected with professional aviation in a way that I've not felt in quite some time. And it took about 10 hours in the jump seat of a 737 to do it. And believe me, that's not a complaint. So what happened? Well, I think I let myself get a little too comfortable at the airport, because we all do this, right? We find things we like, we set them up so that everything works each day in a nice system, and we go through our days in our nice little bubbles. And don't get me wrong, I like that my barista knows what kind of coffee I start my day with. And I love that I can count on my favorite lunch places by the airport, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But as we cruise along in our little bubbles each day, we sometimes lose perspective on the larger picture. And with a picture as big as aviation, well, it's hard enough to keep up, let alone lose anything. Where am I going with this? Well, stay with me, because I'm going to circle around to a very important point. But we need to take a little journey first, and it's via Cleveland, in the jump seat of a 737. So, professional airline flying. Well, in many ways, it is glorious. I mean, how cool is it to be able to make a living doing something like that? It's sort of the pinnacle of aviation, really. It's amazing and it's addicting, the whole experience. But it's also fatiguing, and it's tiring, it's hard, and it can be lonely at times. And if you ask me, that's kind of what makes it so incredibly fascinating. I mean, would you rather spend your working days in a cubicle farm making sales calls that make other people wealthy? Well, okay, maybe that's not really a fair comparison, but professional flying is definitely a type of extreme when it comes to career paths, right? Especially when it's compared to other types of employment. That's all. So, even though I deal directly every day in aircraft operation, and I fly a lot in the general aviation realm, I have to admit, it has been a long time since I've flown on a real honest trip, flight crew style. Like, staying up all night, living in a hotel, dodging thunderstorms coast to coast in a day. The real grind. And I might not go so far as to call it suffering, but it's definitely work. And it was definitely outside my bubble. And it's funny, because once upon a time in my aviation journey, going on multi-day trips was a thing I was programmed to do. It was the thing I wanted, and the thing I studied and worked so hard for, and eventually got, but didn't stay with. And more on that in the future. But for now, after some career changes and life and family changes, I've sort of been reprogrammed to avoid things like that grind. And it took so long that I didn't even see it happening, to the point where I forgot that even though it doesn't sound all that cool to your average person, it's still a treat to go on an adventure to O'Hare each week and to fly through the night and finally have your head hit that pillow in a hotel at 5 a.m. So I think having your head scrambled and put back together again is one of the best things you can do for your psyche. Well, maybe that and a good vacation. But in the end, every time I have one of these pro flying experiences, I go through this little racket where I feel a little bit like exchanging my headset for a rollerboard and some epaulets. But then I think the better of it, not because it isn't awesome, but because somehow or other, the world lets me know that I'm actually in the right place for me. And since you can't really do both, well, eventually everyone has to pick the thing that works best for them. And for now, at least, well, that's okay. And I'm thankful every time I plug in that I'm able to do this job too. So that's it. Professional flying is an amazing path. And for those of you who choose to put in the work and the suffering and all that it takes to make it, well done. And I hope that you're being rewarded for it, as you should be. And for those who chose to go a different way and put in the hard graft to make it there, wherever that may be, well, that's great too. But I want each side of this aviation thing to know what the other side's working with. And I think it gives some clarity and perspective that's easy to lose. And I, for one, am glad to have it back. And that's what this episode's all about. Perspective and working together. For pilots and for controllers, and later on, controllers and controllers. How? Well, by now you're probably wondering what the heck I was doing jump seating around in a 737, and how on earth it got to be such an existential experience for me. And, I don't blame you, so let me explain. As controllers, we have a program where we're able to take 2 training flights per year in the jump seat of most major airlines. It's an actual training event, and it's called FDT, which stands for Flight Deck Training. And that's exactly what it is. It's a reasonable expectation on the part of the pilots who are going from place to place each day to expect that we know how things are done in other places, right? And that in those other places, things are more or less being done the same way. But the harder expectation, and not a totally unreasonable one either, is that controllers actually know what it's like to be in an aircraft, on the receiving end of clearances and instructions, and how what they say and do affects a flight crew, be it the single pilot of a Cessna or a multi-crew professional operation. But there's a limited amount of us that have professional aviation backgrounds and are also controllers. I mean, yeah, there are some. I can name several. And you're going to hear a great interview I did with one of them that I'm positive that you already know. But it's still pretty rare as things go. And even those of us that do have piloting backgrounds probably are limited to a certain kind of flying too, whether it was Part 91 and 135 general aviation style, or maybe it was 121 scheduled, or maybe it was military. Those are the big 3 we usually get, but there's others. Whatever. So there's no way the controller can really be totally familiar all the time with different types of operators and different aircraft types, right? So what can we do about it? Well, I suppose we could hire only controllers that were pilots of some kind, but that would probably lead to some staffing troubles. Or maybe we could train all controllers through some sort of aviation flying program, but I'm guessing that really wouldn't work out either. And we've got a lot to learn. We've got enough. And, there's 100 other reasons that wouldn't work out either. So what else can we do? Well, I'll tell you what, the simple solution might just be to let controllers directly observe pilots doing their jobs. That might work. And hey, maybe that would give pilots some quality time to interact with controllers too. I think we have something here. So here we are at the FDT program. And I'm not going to get too specific about this because I'm not a spokesperson for the FAA. You know that, as the disclaimer says. But I think you all might find it a little interesting to know that we actually are kind of able to do this. And the question I always get when the topic comes up is things like, can you just hop on any flight? Or do you get to fly for free because you work for the FAA? Or how does it work? Do you just flash your badge and hop on? And from the flight crews, I always get the question, can you bump me off the jump seat if I'm commuting? Well, the answers to most of these questions is no, so don't worry, it's not a free-for-all. And no, I don't think I can ruin your commute either. The basics are, number 1, controllers get to do 2 flight deck trainings per year, so we can't just do it all the time and travel wherever we want for free. Number 2 is it has to be done within a work shift. And yeah, there's some caveats, but if you can't get there in 8 or 10 hours, well, you can't go. And it has to be domestic. So JFK tower controllers can't just hop on an overnight flight to Paris, even if they could get there within an 8-hour shift. Number 4, it has to be booked well in advance. Number 5, it can be canceled due to staffing shortages. Number 6, you can't do it in conjunction with leave. So you can't just take a week off, fly to your destination, your vacation destination for free and come back and that's it. Cool. You got a free trip. Doesn't work that way. And also a pre and post training report has to be completed, which includes learning objectives and lessons learned and things like that. So it really is legitimate training. It is not to be confused with free travel. And I rode along with 4 crews on my training trip on a major U.S. airline, 2 legs out, 2 legs back. And I'm not going to say which one. It's probably not appropriate, but the fact that I connected through Chicago is significant, if that helps you any. But that said, I have nothing but nice things to say. Everybody from the airline treated me so well and made me feel welcome in the cockpit and on the plane. And as I talked to each crew, during non-critical phases of flight, of course, they were all genuinely cool with having me there. And they seemed to really appreciate that this kind of training was a thing. So we got to have some pretty interesting talks, and a lot of really good information was exchanged. And sometimes, it seems like pilots and controllers have wildly different jobs. And okay, that may be true in many ways, but I was reminded about how much we also have in common, particularly since we're in a seniority-based culture with a mandatory retirement age. So if you ask me, the FDT program is doing an amazing thing. It's giving a perspective that's almost impossible to match, and I can't wait for my next trip. And before I wrap this up, I had a list of things I observed that I wanted to pass along to you all. The first is about checklists, and I'm not going to go on a big rant about this. You only get that privilege if you're unfortunate enough to have me as your direct flight instructor. But hey, it was nice to watch professional flight crews accomplishing flows and checks with fluidity and ease, not missing anything, each doing their part, and then backing it up in a challenge response way. And for you CFIs out there, I'm talking to you right now. Please get some info on how to do this professionally and pass that along to your students. Watch some of those Just Planes Fight in the Cockpit videos. They're the videos of actual crews doing their jobs, and do as they do. Second, if you have a second radio, it's important to monitor 121.5 as you're flying. Sometimes people call that monitoring the guard frequency or guarding 121.5. There are obvious reasons for that, but often if an airplane gets lost in frequency land, 121.5 is a universal frequency monitored by all centers and most other ATC facilities that can be used to locate an aircraft who went off frequency, maybe went to the wrong one, couldn't remember what the last one was to go back, or maybe relay something if needs be. And lastly, I got a great education on using airborne weather radar when flying in areas of thunderstorms and precipitation. I'm mostly used to using NexRad and other data link sources when I'm flying in general aviation aircraft, like through a G1000 with a SiriusXM account, but they have their inherent limitations, not least of which being the time delay. But the flight crews were able to show me some of the really high-level tricks with different settings, and then I watched as they negotiated deviations and altitude changes to keep everybody safe and comfortable. It was amazing. So for those of you that want to hear a more in-depth trip report, head over to patreon.com/podcasting on a plane, and patrons are going to get all kinds of extra content on this, including a full trip report I'll have up there in a couple of days. So I'm sure you all have some questions about this, don't you? Tell you what, shoot me an email, podcastingonaplane.com/contact. It'll take you to the way you can email me or contact me other ways. And of course, you could always direct message me through social media. And whatever your questions are, we'll talk about them on the next show. This week's iTunes review comes from MFTB ! It's the most recent, yes, but I also picked this one because, let's just read it. You'll see why. They say, great information and production. I just found this podcast after hearing about it on the Airline Pilot Guy. Great info in the first few episodes. It's always great to hear from those that are pilots, but also controllers. So let's do some more of that, shall we? So far, I've done a lot of talking about understanding both sides of this operational thing. But there's another guy out there, and he has a strikingly similar background to me, as you're about to find out. I mean, weirdly similar. Who knows the initials RH? That's right. He's one of the founding co-hosts of Opposing Base's Air Traffic Talk podcast.
Ready.
RH and AG are awesome. They're two controllers, one flies helicopters for the military, and the other one is a former airline pilot. They talk about air traffic, aviation, and how their experiences on both sides of the microphone play out in daily ATC life. They put the pilot-controller spin on aviation too, and they add the education piece that, I don't know about you, but I wish I had during my training. And it would surprise me if you're not already an avid listener of that show. I mean, I sure am. But on the off chance you're not, you're going to be after today. RH and I have been talking for a while about something to do together, and about 2 weeks ago, they had a question on their show that they wanted some help answering. They publicly called me out. It was a lot of fun. But RH and I got together remotely, and the similarities in our aviation journeys are, as he says, eerily similar. And as we talked, I'll tell you what, a bond was formed for sure. So the first part of the interview is on Opposing Bases podcast. So if you haven't heard it already, head on over there and listen, and then come back here for part 2. So if you came here from there already, well, you can sit down and enjoy the rest of our talk on ATC and the industry and life.
The administrative portion of air traffic was eye-opening for me. I didn't realize, if all you had to do was say clear to land, clear for takeoff in that scenario, 9 departures, 12 arrivals, well, what's the big deal? Hit a hole. Well, you have to do something between each of those holes, and you're managing the space, the speed, and the flow. So there's far more behind the scenes that I think most pilots understand, that you're not just sitting up there saying the words clear for takeoff and clear to land, but it's safe to say there's a significant amount behind the microphone that you don't see or hear, and that's the part that makes our job fun, challenging, and oftentimes you need help.
Absolutely. Yeah. I kind of use the analogy sometimes of, if you go to like an urgent care or an emergency room, a doctor can come in and say, hey, you've got a such and such infection. You need antibiotics. Go get some. But somebody needs to write up that prescription. Somebody needs to transcribe what the doctor observed. They have a report they have to do on each patient. They have to have people, clearing out the rooms, getting, okay, you're done. You've got your prescription. Get out of here. And then, pay your copay on the way out, and then let's get the next person in. So there's all those administrative tasks that go on in the background in so many industries, but those are the things that really make the job. It takes you out of your concentration instead of just implementing the work itself. And same thing in flying. You have an emergency or a abnormal situation. It's great to have a co-pilot or the pilot not flying to be able to help you with a checklist and, hit the right switches and make sure you're not missing anything too. So yeah, having that assist, while not always required, is really important sometimes.
So I promised I would talk a little bit about some of the feedback that we got on our show, and I used you as an example of someone that would be an expert in this type of answer due to the type of traffic and the facility that you work in. If you didn't get a chance to listen to that show, I will sort of paraphrase her question, if you don't mind. She was going into an airport with for argument's sake, we can call it a east-west runway like yours. Are you landing 27s and 9s, or is it slightly off?
It's 6 and 2-4, but pretty close.
Okay, well, hers was 2, 3, and 5, so pretty much the same argument.
There you go.
She was coming in from the southeast. She called the tower, introduced herself. They said, report left base for runway 23. Elaborate. What did they want her to do from your point of view?
Yeah, so I did go back in after a little bit of sleuthing on one of my breaks. I did find that spot, and I appreciate the shout out. That was cool.
No problem.
So what you guys talked about sort of right after that, I think was correct. But the issue is that sometimes when you're getting, and I give group talks in front of pilot groups all the time. So often, believe me, I know that when somebody asks a question, maybe it's not like that's kind of what they think happened, but maybe isn't exactly how it went down. Or if they say, well, the guy told me this, and then there's another phraseology that might be very close to that actually means something kind of different. So based on the information that you were given in the question, I would say that since she was to the southeast and it's a more or less east-west runway orientation, that report left base, if that was all that was said, would be the controller probably implying enter left base for runway 23 and report when you're there. That's what I heard. But then again, I realized that, the question could be brought up, like, do you want me to make full left traffic in or on the 45 and then just report when I'm turning base? That might be a valid way too.
Does that scenario unfold in your facility? Pick a scenario where someone would actually enter on a 45 versus you just instructing them to enter on a specific leg in a certain manner. Tell me how that works. Our airspace, we're feeding from the approach side. We feed on the arrival side, and we hold on to them on the approach side of the building. We keep them under our control until they're on the arrival side. So there really is no flinging an airplane from the departure side and saying, enter the downwind, contact tower. We don't do that. We can coordinate that, but we hold locals' airspace. They have automatic releases, so we're protecting that area. We don't want to put a departure in that area. So that type of scenario doesn't exist. Tell me how it unfolds with, a random airplane coming in for full stop and you getting him into your pattern.
Sure. Well, really, assuming that there isn't some major terrain or obstruction or some reason that we can't fly, we've all been taught to be a more or less standard pattern, be it left or right turns. It really depends on where the aircraft is coming from. So assuming that there isn't a major traffic conflict or something else going on, let's just say you've got an east-west runway, like most of this scenario is. If she's to the southeast, so I guess if you're looking at a map, it'd be the lower right, then that person would be told, I would tell that person, if they're more to the south, I would tell them to enter left base. If they were more towards the east in that quadrant, I would probably tell them to make a straight in approach or make approach straight in. So it kind of depends on where exactly the airplane is, reference your runway configuration and all that. So if they were to, let's say the southwest, I would tell them make left traffic because they're more or less going to fly towards the airport on an intercept angle to the downwind. Might not be a perfect 45, but more or less an intercept angle. And it would make sense that they would make left traffic as opposed to just straight into the base. So,
right. Okay.
Yeah. So I make that distinction clearly for the pilot, just so that they know. And sometimes if it's not really clear, or if I want them to kind of fly, really make it clear that they're going to enter on a 45, I'll use the phraseology, make full left traffic or make full right traffic, just so that there's no confusion. I want you on a 45 to a midfield.
I don't think I've ever heard that term. Make full, okay. And that means to enter a 45. In other words, don't just maneuver your airplane so that you're on a perfect eastbound heading on a downwind. I want you on a 45 intercept. I want you to look out, see, turn right, and get in left traffic for runway, in this example, 26 or 27, if you came from the southwest. That's interesting. I don't know that I've ever heard that.
Yeah. So, and what if the person was, let's say they were straight to the west, right, where they're going to fly straight into a downwind, then I'll probably still tell them make left traffic, or I might just say enter left downwind runway 23. And I might even, if they question it, I might say enter straight into the left downwind, or direct entry into the left downwind, because some pilots do wonder, well, do you want me to do it on a 45 or can I just kind of shoot it straight in there? So again, sort of like, in the 0.65, that, you use the proper phraseology the first time, but then if there's any confusion, then of course you're given the latitude to use more plain English to describe it better. And
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, I was going to say in a facility like mine, where a great deal of the pilots are training, or even if they're licensed, they're probably less experienced. So sometimes we kind of go the extra distance to make it really, really clear what we want. Because it's just little stuff like this little nuancy stuff, it can be very confusing. And when you're in the hot seat and you're, a student pilot on a solo, I don't want to make it confusing. I'll use the proper phraseology, but if there's any confusion, then yeah, we'll definitely use that plain English to really make it clear.
Now, you don't actually radar identify the airplanes, but can you see them on your tower display? A basic idea of who they are when they called and reported their altitude? Do you identify them on a radar scope?
We don't officially radar. Like I can't say radar contact. Okay. So I don't ever say that. But I am allowed to use an ident to determine that. And so we're using the certified tower radar display, or CTRDs. That's sort of that page of the 0.65 that covers how I can use it. So I can use it to determine the relationships. I believe I can give o'clock traffic positions. Correct. And so forth. And I can use idents, things like that. So I can actually say traffic 2 o'clock, 3 miles eastbound Cessna 4000, as opposed to high and to your right is an eastbound Cessna. So we can use the proper stuff, and it's good. And plus, since we're in Fusion and Stars, we have radar literally down to the ground where I'm at, because there are so many radar sites around. So so the radar for us, I guess the best way to say it at our tower is, because of that mix, because of the amount of airspace, we kind of run things almost like a mini little sub approach sector, I want to say.
I understand.
Yeah, we kind of try to make it the way that you guys at an actual approach would feed airplanes in, from whatever the fix is towards kind of a midfield downwind, give them a downwind base, dogleg to final intercept, and then on an approach, we kind of just do a reduced version of that to make it all work.
Very interesting. I appreciate the input. That's good feedback. So, Mike Hotel, I hope that answers your question a little more clearly. We promised you to give some feedback, and that was very thorough. Thank you.
Sure. Well, I hope it helped. Hope it didn't make it more confusing.
No, it didn't. Before we close up, I want to give you a chance to, throw anything my way. I'm all ears. We tell our audience all about what we do at our job, and we got a little bit of yours. Do you have any questions for me while you have me? Yeah,
I was going to actually talk, since you work at an up-down, right? So you work both tower and TRACON in a day?
Yes. Well, I started saying yes before you finished. Typically, no. When you start the day, either upstairs in the tower or down in radar, depending on the mix of personnel that day and who needs to train, typically, no, you'll stay in one spot. Depending on a million different scenarios, you could find yourself in hey, keep your headset on you. You're going to go downstairs this round, or we need you to run a break in the tower, go upstairs after your break. Those incidences happen, but it's not as common as 3 or 4 times in a day. No.
Sure. Okay. Well, I know sometimes at our facility, again, we're under a giant consolidated super TRACON, so we're very remote from our overlying TRACON. We're not going to share coworkers. We're not going to share a break room. I mean, they're 15 miles away in another building. So our relationship is overall pretty good, I would say, with our area of the TRACON. But at the same time, there are definitely a lot of people on both sides that have not worked, like tower controllers that have never worked radar, or radar controllers that have never worked any kind of tower. So I know sometimes our needs are different, and sometimes it's hard to see the other person's perspective. How is it for you that works both in the course of a given work week? Do you find that helpful?
Well, that's interesting, because up until about 2 years ago, the majority of the building was fully certified controllers. Now we're about split down the middle a little bit. We've gotten a little bit out of this ratio, but there was a time when we had significantly more trainees than we had certified controllers. And the natural flow most of the time is starting them in the tower to learn the tower first before they go to radar training. That created, and still exists to this day, the ones that haven't started radar training and really have no experience in radar because all they've done is our tower. There is a disconnect there, and they don't. You can't possibly expect them to have the full picture until they've seen radar and worked it and understood. Wait a second. That's why he was so upset when I did that the other day. Now I know, because I'm on the receiving end in the radar room. So it happens. There's, the break room is shared downstairs. So there's plenty of opportunity to, I'll make it sound nice, discuss certain issues that come up where someone unknowingly, I don't think anybody's intentionally trying to make a radar controller's job more difficult, or the opposite. Nobody's trying to make the tower's job more difficult from radar, but it may appear that way in certain actions, and it's largely due to the fact that one side or the other has not been in that room to train and certify, so that they don't have the full picture.
Interesting. And then what about your aviation background? I mean, you asked me this question, but obviously, we're very similar. The same thing applies to you. When you were training, did you find it helpful or more difficult that you had an aviation background prior to air traffic?
I wanted to ask that question in that way, and you worded it so much better than I could have. So I'm glad you asked me. I would not have asked it as well as you did. The short answer is it made it very hard for me to get through the academy. Very hard. I had to do a lot of pausing and thinking Phraseology, for example, was difficult for me. For some reason, pilots say everything we tell them to do in reverse. That was hard for me to get used to. The constantly really putting myself in the airplane to try to imagine the scenario instead of staying in the controller aspect of it and working a problem and figuring out where I wanted airplanes to be. I found myself in the airplane trying to figure out, well, is this going to work? Can they do that? Are they too high? Are they too fast? That did not help me. It was, for that side in the academy, it was difficult. When I got to the training environment at the facility, I feel it helped me a ton. I didn't just have the canned phraseology. I had been to over 100 airports on the East Coast. I've heard every variation of the phraseology. I had more tricks in my bag of tricks, and that I think helped. And it showed, I think, to my trainers. All right, and they knew I was a pilot. I think they kind of held me to a different standard, which, whatever, call it fair or not. They expected me to know a lot of the things that I may not have ever even heard of, and they had their own stereotypes or assumptions about pilots drawn out that wasn't necessarily positive. You know, a lot of controllers don't have a lot of great things to say about pilots for whatever reason, because they don't know. They have no idea what the challenges associated with, you know, a single pilot IFR and IMC. Probably the worst scenario you could be in, especially without an autopilot. They don't have an appreciation for that. I was in the room to say, hey, hold on a second. Give this guy a second. Do you have any idea how hard it is to do what they are doing right now? Back up, relax. You know, that portion in training in live traffic, not a computer at the academy, not scenarios that are designed to really stretch your imagination on how you're going to get through them. But real life, I feel like it helped that I was a pilot. I can't imagine that an aviation background would not help in some way in air traffic training. It's very hard for me to believe that. How about you?
No, yeah, well, I'll tell you, if you like the way I asked the question, I like the way that you answered it 10 times more. That's you pretty much took the words right out of my mouth. That is exactly the experience I had both at the academy and when I got to my facility. And, you know, luckily for me, when I got to my facility, it's my home airport. So a little background I didn't mention before, I've been in some capacity or another at my airport that I work the tower at now since 1996. That's actually when I soloed there.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah. So my airport is very, very personal to me, and is really my second home, and it has been since I was a teenager. So when I got there, it was completely different than the academy, which, again, just like you said, I found very difficult for a number of reasons. And, you know, it came out that I went straight from being a CFI to that job. So, you know, I heard a lot of people say, don't even mention you're a pilot when you're at the academy. And okay, I mean, I can't really hide it for that long. So right. I figured, hey, I'll embrace it. I'll say what I was, but I will in no way, I will always check myself and never be the I know more because I'm a pilot person and be that guy. So I was very careful about that. And you're exactly right. People get a little touchy about that, and they have these preconceived notions and sort of things in their head about the way pilots are. And you're right. But then when we got to the facility, you know, I was immediately sort of treated as, you have a different standard than everybody else does. And again, like you say, for better or worse, that was how it was. But, you know, at the same time, I had a tremendous amount of respect for, three of my coworkers were bartenders before they got this job, you know what I mean? And that's great because they have no aviation background, and they got this job and stuck it out through to certification. And I can't even believe, like, if I didn't have the passion for this that I do, or some of the background knowledge, I mean, I don't know that I'd have made it, you know,
I agree,
to stick through that. Yeah.
It is so much for them. And I didn't hide the fact that I was a pilot at the academy. I was in a class with a bunch of no aviation experience. And I told them, I said, the amount of information that they are cramming down your brain in 3 months is extraordinary. I mean, a lot of it, you know, a lot of the tests you will kind of brain dump, you know, you take the test and you may never see it again, depending on what type of facility you go to. But a large portion of the information they were giving us, it was going to be the only time you ever learned it, and you were expected to know it when you got to your facility. And I sympathized with them. I had, at the time, 10 years of aviation experience that was the only way I got through the academics of it. I don't know how those with no aviation can get through that environment. And like you said, show up at a facility where training is, I don't know about your facility, but training is not fun. You're basically set up to be critiqued for hours upon end every day and criticized for the things you do wrong, never recognized for the things you do right. And if you don't love aviation and have some solid background to support maybe some of the questionable decisions that you made, it would be demoralizing to show up and get beat up. So I give people a ton of credit to come into this job having known really nothing about aviation, let alone controlling airplanes that they know nothing about. It's hats off to anybody who's done it. It's really an amazing feat.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Well, cool. We are coming up on about an hour. I am super excited that we got this interview done. I think it was very good so far, and one day we'll continue it. I'd love to be on your show, and feel free to play this in some format at your choice. But I fully intend on playing this interview on our show. So I want to thank you. And AG's not here. I'm recording by myself. You haven't heard him. He's in his quiet box.
I've heard about that quiet box. I need to get one of those.
My dog was the loudest participant in tonight's interview. There's a thunderstorm here, and I've talked about this. She's afraid of noise, and she's literally shaking underneath my chair. So, no, I'm very excited that we did this, and I want to thank you for taking time out and carving out some time to answer these questions. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And you know what? I thank you so much for, I really appreciate that you deferred to my judgment on a question for your show. And I've had a great time talking with you and answering this. And, it's one of those things where talking about this stuff with other folks that do the same thing is just kind of one of those things that it's so enjoyable. And, the fact that you guys are out there doing the podcast the way that you guys do it, and it's very informative and very direct, and I can tell why your popularity is growing so fast. It's a great show, and I'm honored to be on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And before we go, I'll let you plug your show. I mentioned the name of it, but the floor is yours to close us out.
All right. Well, my show is called Podcasting on a Plane. It's an aviation podcast. You can go to podcastingonaplane.com. That's the website. And of course, you can get the podcast from, I think, pretty much anywhere you can get a podcast at this point. Definitely iTunes, Google, Stitcher, and I don't know, surprise me with something else, but you can stream it straight off the website too if you want. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it is at Podcasting on a Plane. It's actually pretty much Podcasting on a Plane across the board. The only exception is Twitter, which is Podcast on a Plane. No wing. But that's where you can find me, and I would love to hear from all of you.
Brandon does an awesome interview setup on his show. I just said your name. Are you okay with that?
Oh, that's fine. No. That's fine.
You say it on your show. We don't on ours.
Oh, no, I'm not keeping that a secret. It's fun to use our initials because this is air traffic. But
Bravo Golf does an interview format on a lot of his shows, and really great interviews. I love listening to your show, and I look forward to each new episode. So again, thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll do this again sometime.
I can't wait. Well, I hope you can feel what a fun time we had doing that interview. And let me tell you, it won't be the last time we work together. So stay tuned for more of that. Thoughts, comments on what you heard today? Email or message me. The website, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And if you figured out where I work, my favorite way to talk, of course, is always the VHF shout out. If you want me to read your iTunes review, well, just leave one and listen in next time. Oh, and don't forget, leave a 5-star review for the Opposing Bases guys. It's a show all aviators should be listening to, no matter where they are in their journey. And once more, I want to thank RH at Opposing Bases for his help in putting all this together. And of course, my man Daniel Zombo for the song Soul. I'm just going to leave it at that. Frequency changes approved, and we'll see you on the next episode. Good day. The podcast Podcasting on a Plane podcast is presented for entertainment purposes only. My comments and those of my guests, the website's content, and any of the social media, etc. are not part of my official responsibility as a controller or an FAA employee. The views and opinions you hear on the podcast are mine and those of my guests, and not necessarily that of the FAA. There is no nexus between podcasting on a plane and the FAA. Also, while I am a CFI, I'm not your CFI. Nor am I your mechanic, your doctor, your shrink, or your spouse. This podcast is presented for entertainment, camaraderie, and fun, but is in no way, shape, or form professional advice. It's not legal counsel, and it's definitely not flight instruction. If you are in need of professional advice, get some from somewhere more appropriate than a podcast, no matter how good this one may be.